They held the wedding at a modern art center just outside Denver, the kind of place where everything gleams. Glass walls that reach the sky, white floors that hush every footstep, chandeliers like frozen tears. The quartet played something delicate and distant. People laughed. I stood near the wall, alone in my charcoal suit, watching them swirl around me like I was the gap in their perfect picture. I'm John Miller. I'm a builder, drywall, insulation, patchwork roofs, busted sinks. But more than that, I raised Nate. His mother left when he was 4. One morning she made pancakes, packed his lunch, then walked out the door with a suitcase and didn't come back. No goodbye, no explanation, just a note that said, "Don't come looking. I need to be my own person again." So I raised him. I didn't know how to braid hair, didn't know how to read bedtime stories without stumbling, but I knew how to stay. And that's what I did. I stayed, every day, through scraped knees, school fights, tears over forgotten birthdays, late nights sitting at the edge of his bed, while he stared at the ceiling wondering what he'd done to make her leave. I worked construction during the day, then picked up handyman gigs at night. We lived in a rented duplex with a stubborn water heater and a dying maple tree out front. Nate had what he needed: school shoes, notebooks, food that didn't come from a box every night. I patched up his heart with what little I had, and in return, he gave me a word I held like gold: Dad. He called me that even when his mother resurfaced once or twice a year, phoning in from California or wherever she had wandered. She talked to him like he was a character in a story she used to write. I never stopped her from calling. I never poisoned him against her. I just told him, "You're my son. That's what matters." He'd nod, and that was enough. Until the wedding. They placed the name cards at the reception tables, each one a neat little rectangle of white linen stock with gold lettering. I found mine wedged between 2 seats at the outermost edge of the room, by the caterer's station, far from the wedding party. I reached for it without thinking. Read it twice before it sank in. Low-educated fake dad. For words. Burned into that elegant little card like a brand. Laughter erupted before I could even move. The bride's family, Ivy League smiles and designer disdain, had apparently spotted it. A man in a slick navy blazer pulled out his phone and snapped a picture. "Oh my God! They actually did it," someone whispered. A woman with teeth too white to be real leaned in and said, "Is this a joke? Or are we being avant-garde?" More laughter. Not the kind that invites you in. The kind that strips you clean in front of strangers. I sat down slowly, like my body was too heavy to hold up. My hand shook. Not from rage, that came later, but from something quieter. Something colder. A kind of shame I hadn't felt since I was a boy. The shame of being uninvited from your own life. I looked around for Nate. He was standing with Sophie, his new bride. Her gown shimmered like poured milk under the chandeliers. He didn't see me. Or maybe he did and turned away. I'll never know. That's the thing about shame. It makes cowards of us all. I felt my throat close. Not from tears. I don't cry easily. But from something worse. The realization that this was planned. Someone had made that card. Someone had written those words and handed them to a printer and smiled when the ink dried. I stood up, straightened my tie, slipped the card into my pocket. Not as evidence. As reminder. A server passed by, balancing flutes of champagne. I didn't take one. I moved slowly toward the exit, one step at a time, my footsteps vanishing under the weight of the music and laughter. No one stopped me. Not a soul turned their head. Until, "Dad!" I froze. The voice wasn't angry. It wasn't embarrassed. It was urgent. "Dad, wait!" I turned. Nate was jogging toward me, loosening his tie, his eyes wide. Behind him, Sophie was speaking to a woman in a pantsuit and heels that probably cost more than my truck. She didn't look over. She didn't even notice he was gone. He reached me just outside the double doors. "I'm sorry," he said. His breath hitched. "I didn't know they'd. I swear I didn't know about the card. I didn't see it until—" He stopped, shook his head, and looked at me like he wasn't sure what world he'd stepped into. I looked at him long and hard. There was sweat on his brow. Not from dancing. From panic. From the sudden weight of realizing who'd actually shown up for him, who had always shown up. He stepped closer. "Let's go home," he said, just like that. And I nodded, because what else was there? We walked out together, no fanfare, no goodbyes. I could hear the string quartet playing something sweet and empty as the doors closed behind us. I didn't look back. The night was cool. The parking lot was dim. I climbed into my old truck, cracked the window, and waited while Nate changed out of his tux in the back seat. We drove for half an hour in silence. I didn't ask questions. He didn't offer explanations. But at one point, he reached across the seat, placed his hand over mine, and squeezed. "Dad," he said soft, "you're the only reason I made it here." I kept my eyes on the road, because if I'd looked at him then, I might have wept. And I've spent a lifetime learning how not to. That night, we pulled into a motel off I-70. No reservations. Just a room with flickering lights and 2 twin beds and the kind of stale air that smells like cigarettes and old dreams. We didn't say much. I turned on the TV just for the noise. Nate sat on the edge of the bed in his undershirt, staring at the carpet like it held some kind of answer. "Why didn't you say something?" he finally asked. I shrugged. What would I have said? That it wasn't okay. That it hurt. I thought about that. Thought about all the years I'd carried the hurt without naming it. All the times I'd eaten dinner alone while he visited his mother. All the moments I'd kept the fridge full, the lights on, the mortgage paid, while her name still got a smile and mine got silence. "I've learned," I said slowly, "that when people don't see you, words don't help." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I'm sorry." And for the first time, I believed it. The motel smelled like bleach and old sweat. The air conditioning groaned like it resented us. We didn't sleep much. I lay on one bed, Nate on the other, each of us facing opposite walls like strangers sharing a crime scene. The television buzzed faintly from the corner, late-night commercials selling weight loss pills, faith-healing DVDs, divorce lawyers. We didn't speak. Sometime around 3 a.m. I sat up. My chest ached. Not from anger, but something worse. Emptiness. It felt like building a house from the ground up, brick by brick, only to realize the blueprints were for someone else's dream. I stared at the ceiling. I thought about packing my truck and disappearing. I had some savings, not much, but enough to vanish for a while. I could find work in Wyoming. Maybe Idaho. Somewhere quiet, where people don't measure you by the degree on your wall or the suit you wear. I thought about leaving everything behind. Nate, Denver, my own name. Because what do you do when the one person you raised lets you be publicly humiliated and only acts when it's safe to say sorry? By sunrise, the decision was made. I'd give him the truck. Let him start fresh. Maybe it would teach him something. Maybe not. But I was done pretending I still belonged. I got dressed quietly, grabbed my wallet, and walked to the bathroom mirror. My tie was still tucked in my jacket pocket. I hadn't worn it in over a decade, and I wouldn't again. I looked at myself in that dim, yellowed glass. The creases, the gray along my temples, the wear behind my eyes. I looked like a man who'd bet everything on a rigged game. I was reaching for my keys when the knock came. 3 soft taps. I thought maybe it was a clerk. Maybe someone had heard us leave the reception and wanted to gloat. I opened the door expecting confrontation. Instead, it was Sophie, still in her gown, mascara smudged under her eyes, barefoot, shivering slightly. Behind her stood Nate, holding a small suitcase. She didn't speak right away, just stood there trying to summon breath. Then, "I'm so sorry." Her voice cracked halfway through the sentence, and she started to cry. Not the theatrical sobs of guilt, but quiet, raw, exhausted crying. The kind that comes after something inside you breaks for good. I stepped aside. They came in. Nate set the suitcase down by the door. Sophie sat on the edge of the bed, her hands clasped tight in her lap like she was afraid they'd betray her again. I waited, and finally Nate spoke. "We're leaving. We're done with them. Them. Not my in-laws. Not my family. Just them." He looked me in the eyes. No hesitation. "You were my dad. All my life. And I let them humiliate you. I sat at that table while they laughed. I didn't speak up. I thought it would pass. I thought. He paused, swallowing hard. I thought you were strong enough to take it. He shook his head, furious at himself. I was wrong. Sophie stood then. They didn't want you there, John. They told the planner to put you at the back. They made that name card. My aunt wrote it, thinking it was funny. My father saw it and didn't stop it. I didn't know until it was already on the table. She stepped closer. You're not their kind of man, she said. That's what they kept saying. They called you simple, salt of the earth. Like that was an insult. But you're the only man I've met who shows up when it matters. I wanted my wedding to be about that. About family. But it turned into something I hate. She looked at Nate. He nodded. We're cutting ties, Nate said. We signed the documents last night before the reception. Partial shares. Her dad thinks it's symbolic. But we had it notarized. We're starting a business. I stared at them both. What kind of business? Sophie smiled through the tears. A printing press. Small. Independent. Books by new voices. Things the big publishers won't touch. I didn't respond. Not right away. Because I was still stuck on the word we. Not they. Not her. Not him. We. They had packed a suitcase. Left the after-party. Walked out of a family fortune. All because of what happened at that table. And because of me. I'm not good at business, I said. You're good at building, Sophie replied. We'll handle the paperwork. You build the walls, the shelves, the place itself. You teach us how to make something that lasts. Nate nodded. We want you with us. I sat down. Hard. Not because I was overwhelmed. Because I was afraid to believe it. I'd spent years believing I was a stand-in. Placeholder. The man who picked up the pieces until the real family stepped back in. And now they were handing me a piece of something new. Something built from respect, not obligation. You sure? I asked. Nate answered. I've never been more sure of anything. That night we stayed at the motel. 3 people in a room meant for 2. Sophie took the bed. Nate curled up in the armchair. I slept near the window, listening to traffic hum along the highway. I didn't dream. I didn't need to. In the morning, I brewed motel coffee and sat at the small table, staring out over the parking lot. Sophie came up behind me and placed a manila folder on the table. Business registration. Your name's on it. She hesitated. I know it doesn't undo what happened, but it's real. I opened it. Saw my name printed beside theirs. John Miller, co-founder. The paper smelled like ink and cardboard and something new. It smelled like a future that wasn't borrowed from someone else's plans. Later that day, we drove back to my duplex. The grass hadn't been cut in weeks. The front step creaked. Inside, the air was stale. But it was home. For now. Nate said they'd move in temporarily. Said they wanted to save money before investing in equipment. Sophie had already picked out a space for the press. A small commercial lot on the edge of town. Cheap but sturdy. I'll build the shelves, I said. Nate grinned. You'll run the place. Sophie smiled. And we'll make stories that last. That night, I grilled burgers on the back porch. Sophie insisted on cutting the tomatoes herself. Nate swept the leaves from the patio without being asked. We sat together under the dim porch light, eating off paper plates. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to perform. I didn't have to prove my worth or earn my place. I was just there, present, wanted. The world hadn't fixed itself overnight. The people who laughed at me still existed. The photo of that name card was probably floating somewhere online, ready to be shared and mocked by strangers. But it didn't matter, because I was done building rooms for people who locked the door behind me. Now I built for us. It didn't happen all at once. Nothing ever does. The old life didn't explode or scream. It just dissolved, quietly, like steam curling off a cup of black coffee, disappearing before you know it's gone. First, I shut off the phone line I'd kept for years, the one Nate's mother used to call. I didn't leave a forwarding number. I didn't send a message. I just watched the signal die on the screen, battery drained, silence restored. Then I blocked her number on the new line. It wasn't rage. It wasn't revenge. It was clarity. The kind that comes after you spend 20 years keeping the door open for someone who never planned to walk through it. A week later, a message slipped through via email. I hadn't realized I still had her saved there. The subject line said, "That wedding was a circus." Her tone was biting. She called Sophie a drama queen, said Nate had gone soft, and blamed me for corrupting what she called his ambition. "You're poisoning him with your small thinking," she wrote. "Printing books? Who reads anymore?" I didn't reply. The house we moved into was nothing grand. 2 bedrooms with paneling from the 80s, a front step that dipped slightly at the edge. But it was ours, paid for in cash. No mortgage, no landlord. Sophie picked the curtains. Nate carried the boxes. I unpacked the tools first. The backyard smelled of pine and old dirt. There was a garden bed that hadn't been touched in years. I planted tomatoes, basil, and bell peppers. Didn't tell anyone. Just started digging one morning with an old spade and let the sweat do the talking. Peace doesn't arrive like a parade. It shows up in quiet rituals. Sophie's humming while she paints the office walls. Nate at the kitchen table, highlighting lines in a business textbook I couldn't begin to understand. Me sanding down old wood, shaping shelves for a place that didn't mock me for showing up in boots and calloused hands. We didn't talk much about the wedding. Not directly. Sometimes Sophie would mention the string quartet and wince. Sometimes Nate would apologize without words. A longer hug, a tighter grip on my shoulder. And sometimes, silence did more than any confession ever could. The first sign of intrusion came 3 weeks after we settled in. An envelope, thick, expensive, cream-colored, addressed to Sophie in tight, familiar handwriting. Her father. Inside. A letter folded twice, perfumed, as if that could mask the bitterness inside. "We didn't raise you to choose mediocrity. This man is beneath you. Come home before it's too late." Sophie burned the letter in the sink. Didn't say a word while it turned to ash. Nate stood beside her, holding her wrist until the fire died. 3 days later, her mother called the business line. Left a voicemail. "You've ruined her future." Sophie smirked when she heard it. Then she deleted it. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She just said, "They never called you her father. Well, now they're not part of our family. You are." I didn't know how to respond. I'd spent years chasing scraps of approval. Now someone had just handed me the whole seat at the table. It didn't feel real, but it was. A few more weeks passed and then nothing. No letters, no calls, no invitations to talk, just distance. At first, I waited for retaliation, threats, gossip, lawsuits even. Rich people like that don't take disobedience lightly. But none came. They were silent. Not out of peace, out of strategy. When wealthy people want to hurt you, they don't throw punches. They erase you, and that's exactly what they did. Sophie's name disappeared from her family trust. Nate's degree from the university they funded was reassessed. They even tried to cancel a small loan we'd secured through a friend of the family. Didn't matter, because we were ready. We launched the press a month ahead of schedule. The space we rented was dusty, cramped, and half-lit, but it had good bones. I built the shelves from reclaimed oak. Sophie designed the logo by hand. Nate handled the digital side, email chains, author contracts, printer negotiations. I didn't understand most of it, but I understood the smell of fresh-cut wood and the way sunlight fell through the front window. We printed our first book in October, a poetry collection by a local teacher who'd been rejected by every major house. Thin pages, soft cover, the kind of book you hold gently, like it might disappear if gripped too tight. We sold 30 copies in the first week, then 100, then 500. Something was happening, something slow but real. People weren't just buying the book. They were writing to us, asking for more, saying it mattered, saying it made them feel seen. I didn't say much, but every evening, I'd sit on the back porch with a mug of coffee and hold the book in my hands like it was something sacred, because it was. Not the book. The fact that it came from us. From me. One night, I stayed late at the shop, organizing a new shipment. The front door chimed and I turned, expecting Nate. It was Sophie. She looked tired but proud. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, and watched me shelve a box of paperbacks. "You ever think," she said, "that maybe this was always where you were meant to be?" I looked around. Dust in the air. The smell of ink and wood glue. Sunlight hitting the floor in golden angles. "No," I said. She laughed. "Well, I do." And then she stepped forward, wrapped her arms around me, and whispered, "Thank you for not leaving." I didn't know how to answer. I just held on. That weekend, Nate hosted our first book launch. Nothing fancy. Folding chairs, paper lanterns, cheap wine. But people came. Teachers, mechanics, students, folks with notebooks full of poems they were too scared to share. And they looked at me, not through me, when they said, "Thank you for building this." No one asked about the wedding. No one laughed at my boots. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to shrink myself to fit someone else's table. At night, after the guests had gone and the lights had dimmed, I sat alone in the press room, the walls still humming from the noise. I looked at the shelves I'd built, the books, the quiet, and I realized I hadn't just left something behind. I'd buried it. The man who begged for scraps of recognition. He was gone. And in his place stood someone new. Someone unbent. That was the lesson. The one no one teaches you. You don't win by forcing them to see your worth. You win when you no longer need them to. We passed our first year in silence. Not the kind that suffocates, but the kind that calms. No more late-night calls from people who only remembered me when they needed something. No more forced holidays or table scraps of affection handed out like guilt-tipped coins. Just the three of us, Nate, Sophie, and me. A quiet house. A business growing by word of mouth. Some days fast, some days slow, but always forward. There were small things I noticed. Signs that the old life, the one that called me a placeholder, was fading for good. Nate started using my tools without asking. My hands had shaped the handles. He picked them up like second nature. He even started fixing things on his own. A leaky pipe under the sink, a broken window lock, a jammed drawer in the office. It wasn't about the repairs. It was about the inheritance of habit. Watching your father make something and learning by instinct how to follow. Sophie added my name to the mailbox. No fanfare, just a strip of adhesive label with 3 names in even rows. Nate, Sophie, John. A woman once asked if I was her father. Sophie just smiled and said, "Yes." That moment stayed with me, not because of what she said, but because of how easy it came. She didn't glance at me for permission. She didn't flinch. She just answered like it had always been true, because maybe it had. The silence from her parents held steady. No apologies, no threats, no half-hearted letters written in stiff cursive. Just nothing. They were gone, and their absence stopped feeling like loss. It became space, room to breathe, to build, to live without measuring my worth against people who never learned how to carry anything but judgment. Sometimes I'd find myself sitting on the back porch, long after the sun had slipped down behind the mountains, holding a coffee gone cold, not thinking, not remembering, just being. That was new. For years, my head had always been loud. Calculations, doubts, silent speeches I never gave. Now it was still. Nate would come out now and then. He didn't always speak. He'd just sit beside me, watching the trees shift in the wind. His hands calloused in ways they hadn't been before. Business had made him sharper. But working with me, sanding, cutting, lifting, it had made him grounded. He moved differently now, like a man who knew what real weight felt like. One night, he placed a hand on my shoulder. That was all. Not thank you. Not sorry. Just presence. I've learned that men don't always need words. Sometimes the silence is enough if it's the right kind. There were still echoes of the old life, of course. Small ghosts that slipped through the cracks. Nate's mother sent one final email. No subject line. Just 3 lines of text. "He'll regret this. You'll both fail. "You're not real family." I printed it, framed it, hung it in the shop bathroom just above the toilet. Sophie laughed for 5 minutes when she saw it. I didn't. I just said, "Let her watch," and we kept going. The press grew. We published 6 books in the second year. Local voices, immigrant poets, short story collections from young kids who thought no one would ever read them. We didn't make millions. That wasn't the point. We paid our bills. We kept the lights on. We built something with our hands. Every time a box of books arrived from the printer, I opened it the same way I opened my first toolbox. Careful, reverent, like it carried more than paper. Sometimes customers would ask who I was. Sophie had business cards that read, "John Miller, co-founder, builder, father." I asked her why she wrote it that way. She said, "Because that's what you are." And for once, I didn't argue. One afternoon in early spring, a man came into the shop. He wore a sharp blazer, polished shoes, and a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. I knew the type. Wealth with a memory too short to remember what it stood on. He said he was Sophie's uncle. Said he was passing through. Said he wanted to see what this little project had become. I didn't shake his hand, just pointed him to the shelves and stepped aside. He walked slowly, ran his fingers along the spines, paused in front of the poetry section. Then he turned. "I remember you," he said, "from the wedding. You were the guy in the back, right?" I didn't speak. He smirked again. "Still doing the handyman thing, huh?" I looked around, at the shelves I'd built, the lighting I'd installed, the walls I'd painted, the life I'd restored. "Yeah," I said, "still building." He didn't buy anything, just nodded and walked out. Sophie found me after. "I'm sorry," she said. I shook my head. "He wasn't here to shame me," I said. "He was here to see if we'd failed." She exhaled. "And we haven't." "No," I said, "we haven't." That night we sat on the porch again. Me, Nate, and Sophie. No music, no screens. Just the sound of wind brushing against drying book pages we'd hung on the clothesline, a trick we'd learned to keep certain covers from warping. The pages rustled like whispers, like ghosts trying to find a place in the quiet. I asked Nate, out of nowhere, "Do you miss them?" He didn't pretend not to know who I meant. He stared out at the trees and said, "No, I miss the idea of them, but the reality, no." I nodded. He turned to me. "I never told you what I felt that night," he said. "At the wedding, when I saw you walk out." I didn't press. He told me anyway. I felt small, like a child again, watching the one person who never left finally leave. He paused. "But when I chased you into the parking lot, when you turned around, I realized something. I waited. That love doesn't mean never walking away," he said. "It means being worth following." I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything, just looked down at my hands. The same hands that had tied his shoes, lifted him out of bathtubs, signed his college applications, fixed his broken bed frames, held his shoulders after breakups, wrote checks I couldn't afford, and caught him every time the world tried to drop him. Calloused hands. Real ones. Now resting. That's the thing no one tells you about building a life from scratch. You don't know it's real until someone tries to take it away, and fails. I never heard from Sophie's parents again. Never got a Christmas card. Never saw the photo they took of the name card. Low-educated fake dad. I'm sure it's out there somewhere. Maybe still floating around their phones. Something to pass around at cocktail parties when the wine is running thin and they need something to laugh at. Let them laugh. Because I'm not the man in that card anymore. I'm not the placeholder, the afterthought, the background character in someone else's story. I'm the man who stayed, and then left, and then built something better. I don't need a seat at their table. I built my own, and at that table sits my son, his wife, and me. Nothing borrowed, nothing faked, nothing performed, just truth, just presence, just dad. So now I ask you, anyone listening, anyone watching from the shadows, was I wrong? Was I wrong to walk away from a world that only ever welcomed me with a laugh? Was I wrong to stop begging for a name I had already earned? Or is there a time, a moment so quiet and holy, when silence becomes your answer, and respect begins when the applause stops? You tell me, would you have endured it? Or would you, like me, finally let go?